I used to believe that if you worked hard, kept your head down, and did exactly what was asked of you, the truth would protect you. I learned the hard way that truth doesn't protect anyone. It waits. They blamed me for a project I never touched. Until the audit said otherwise, they were whispered across a glass conference table by my own uncle, said gently like he was doing me a favor by preparing me for what was coming. I worked at Meridian Solutions, a mid-sized consulting firm that looked clean on the outside and ran on unspoken rules inside. The kind of place where everyone smiled in meetings and saved their real opinions for private emails. The kind of place where family ties mattered more than job titles, even when no one said it out loud. My Aunt Lydia was the CFO. Her husband, my Uncle Ron, sat on the board. My cousin Harry was a senior project manager, and I was just there. I wasn't hired because of them. Or at least, that's what everyone pretended. I had the degree. I had the experience. I had the numbers to prove I deserved my role as a compliance analyst. My job was simple on paper. Review processes, flag risks, document inconsistencies. I didn't approve budgets. I didn't sign contracts. I didn't lead projects, which is why what happened next still doesn't make sense to people who hear this story for the first time. The Atlas project was announced on a Monday. Big client, big money, big expectations. Everyone knew it was Harry's project. His name was on the proposal. His signature was on the kickoff documents. He ran the meetings, set the timelines, and assigned the teams. I wasn't even invited to the first 3 planning sessions. By the 4th week, people were already nervous. Vendors weren't responding. Numbers didn't align. Deliverables were being revised quietly instead of discussed openly. When I asked for documentation related to Atlas for a routine compliance check, I was told it was still being organized. That phrase should have warned me. Instead, I did what I always did. I documented the response and moved on. Then, one Friday afternoon, an email went out to the executive group. Not copied to me, not forwarded, but it changed everything. Subject line: immediate review required, Atlas project oversight. By Monday morning, the building felt different. Conversations stopped when I walked by. People avoided eye contact. Doors closed more often. At 10:15 a.m., my calendar updated without explanation. Meeting, Atlas review attendees, executive team, compliance, legal. I walked into the conference room with my notebook, my laptop, and no idea that my name had already been attached to something I didn't recognize. Harry didn't look at me when I sat down. My Aunt Lydia smiled too much. The legal director cleared his throat and said, "We've identified several irregularities in Atlas that require clarification." He paused, then looked directly at me. Specifically, he said, regarding compliance sign-offs. I blinked. Once. Then again. "I haven't signed off on Atlas," I said. "Calm. Factual." Lydia folded her hands. "Your department is listed as the final compliance checkpoint." "That doesn't mean I approved anything," I replied. "There's a difference between oversight and authorization." Harry finally looked up. "You reviewed the process," he said. "You didn't raise any red flags." "I wasn't given the process documents," I said. "I requested them. Multiple times." Silence. Then Ron leaned back in his chair and said, "Let's not get defensive." That's when I knew this wasn't about clarity. It was about direction. Over the next 40 minutes, the conversation twisted itself into something unrecognizable. The project issues were discussed in vague terms. Dates were blurred. Emails were summarized instead of shown. Decisions were referenced without documentation. And every time a gap appeared, it somehow pointed in my direction. You were aware of the timeline. You were looped in on the review. You didn't object. Each sentence landed softly, politely, like it wasn't an accusation at all. But when the meeting ended, one thing was clear. The problem had a name now, and it was mine. By Tuesday, HR requested a statement. By Wednesday, legal asked for access to my emails. By Thursday, People were calling it my project. Atlas had become my shadow. What made it worse wasn't the pressure. It wasn't the fear of losing my job. It was the way my family handled it. At home, group chats went quiet. My aunt stopped answering my calls. Harry sent one message that said, "We'll talk later." Later never came. Instead, I heard things through other people. That Lydia was disappointed. That Ron thought I had overstepped. That Harry felt betrayed. Betrayed. By the second week, the company announced an external audit. Officially, it was routine. Unofficially, it was a hunt. Auditors arrived with calm voices and sharp questions. They asked for logs, access trails, approval histories. They didn't care about feelings. They cared about records. That's when something interesting happened. They stopped asking me questions. Not because I was unimportant, but because my name stopped appearing where it shouldn't have been. I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that my access was restricted temporarily, my workload was reassigned, and my presence felt tolerated. One afternoon, I overheard two managers whispering near the printer. She should have spoken up sooner. She knew how risky it was. I didn't correct them, not because I agreed, but because I had started to understand something. This wasn't about a mistake. It was about a narrative. And once a story takes hold inside a company, especially a family-run one, facts become inconvenient. The audit took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of polite distance. 6 weeks of careful wording. 6 weeks of being treated like a liability instead of a colleague. I was called into meetings where decisions were already made. I was CC'd on emails after actions were taken. I was thanked for my cooperation without being told what I was cooperating with. Then, one morning, my badge didn't work. Security smiled and said IT issue. Should be resolved shortly. It wasn't. Instead, I was escorted to a small office with glass walls and asked to wait. Lydia walked in 10 minutes later. She closed the door and sighed. "You know this has gotten bigger than any of us," she said. "I know I didn't approve Atlas," I replied. She looked at me like I had missed the point. "This audit," she said slowly, "is going to conclude something. We need to be prepared for that." Prepared for what? I asked. For accountability. There it was. Not truth. Not accuracy. Accountability. And somehow, I had become the most convenient place to put it. I asked her a simple question. "Have you seen the access logs?" She hesitated. "I've seen summaries." "Not summaries," I said. "Logs." She didn't answer. That was the moment I realized the audit wasn't just reviewing Atlas. It was exposing something much larger. And the people closest to me were afraid of what it would show. Because, while they were busy deciding how to explain the failure, the system had already recorded who actually touched the project. And who didn't. After that meeting with Lydia, nothing was said out loud, but everything changed. My badge started working again the next day, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. People had decided who I was in this story. I could feel it in the way conversations stopped when I entered a room, in the way emails suddenly included legal just to be safe, in the way my calendar filled up with vague meetings that led nowhere. The audit team didn't treat me the same way the company did. They were polite, direct, methodical. When they asked questions, they asked for evidence, not reassurance. When they listened, they took notes instead of drawing conclusions. That difference mattered more than I realized at the time. The lead auditor, a woman named Karen, scheduled a one-on-one with me toward the end of the second audit week. No executives, no legal, just her and me in a quiet conference room. "I want you to walk me through your involvement with Atlas," she said. So I did. I told her when I first heard about the project. I told her when I requested documentation. I told her how those requests were delayed, redirected, or ignored. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't speculate. I stuck to dates, emails, and facts. She nodded, typed, asked follow-up questions that told me she already knew the answers. "Did you ever have system access to the Atlas budget files?" she asked. "No," I said. I requested view-only access twice. It was never granted. Did you approve any vendor contracts? No. Did you attend any executive review meetings? No. She stopped typing and looked at me. Thank you, she said. That's all for now. That was it. No reaction. No reassurance. No warning. When I returned to my desk, Harry was standing near it, pretending to read something on his phone. He didn't look up until I sat down. They're really digging into everything, he said casually. That's what audits do, I replied. He nodded, then added, They asked me about you. About what? Your role, he said. Your oversight. I didn't respond. I told them you were involved early, he said. I looked up at him, then asked, Involved how? He shrugged. You reviewed processes. I reviewed nothing, I said, because nothing was sent. His jaw tightened. You're being technical. No, I said. I'm being accurate. That was the first crack. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to let something leak through. Over the next few days, small details started surfacing. An email chain where Harry approved a vendor change without notifying finance. A shared drive folder where documents were edited late at night by accounts that weren't supposed to have access. A compliance checklist Harry'd complete without a timestamp or signature. None of it had my name on it, but the company still acted like it did. HR scheduled another meeting. This time, they asked me to acknowledge a procedural lapse. I asked them to show me where I had lapsed. They said the documentation was under review. Legal sent a memo reminding me of my obligation to cooperate fully. I already was. At home, things were worse. Family dinners stopped including me. My mother told me Lydia said it was too awkward to have me around while things were unresolved. My cousin texted once, asking if I was okay, then never responded when I said yes. What hurt wasn't the isolation. It was the certainty. They had already decided what this meant. That I had embarrassed them. That I had failed them. That I had put the family name at risk. And the easiest way to fix that was to let the blame settle where it had landed. The audit entered its 4th week, and tension turned sharp. Karen requested system logs going back 18 months. She requested personal access credentials. She requested internal messaging records tied to Atlas keywords. That request didn't sit well with leadership. There was a closed-door meeting I wasn't invited to. I knew because Harry's assistant accidentally forwarded me the calendar invite before deleting it. Subject: audit scope concerns. That night, my phone rang. It was Ron. We need to talk, he said. We met at a quiet restaurant halfway between our houses. He arrived early, ordered for himself, didn't ask what I wanted. You're being stubborn, he said after the waiter left. I'm being honest, I replied. He sighed like I was a child refusing to understand something simple. This company isn't just a workplace, he said. It's our legacy. I didn't damage that legacy, I said. I didn't touch Atlas. That's not the issue, he said. Perception matters. I stared at him. So does evidence. He leaned forward. The audit is going to conclude that controls failed. Someone didn't do their job. If that person isn't clearly identified, the board will start asking questions none of us want answered. And you think that person should be me? I think, he said carefully, that you're in a position to absorb this. Absorb it, like a shock, like an impact, like something temporary that would eventually settle. What happens to me? I asked. He hesitated. There would be consequences. I waited. Your role might be restructured. Fired. He didn't correct me. And Harry? I asked. Ron's voice softened. Harry has a future here. That was the moment everything snapped into focus. This wasn't chaos. This was strategy. The audit wasn't a threat to the company. It was a threat to Harry. And I was the buffer. When I got home, I pulled every email I had ever sent related to Atlas. I printed access request tickets. I saved calendar invites that didn't include me. I organized everything chronologically, not because anyone asked me to, but because I knew I would need it. The next morning, Karen emailed me directly. Subject: follow-up questions. She asked for confirmation of my access permissions. She asked whether I had ever shared credentials. She asked whether I had been instructed verbally to bypass documentation. I answered everything. Then I attached the evidence. All of it. An hour later, she replied, "Thank you. This is helpful." That was the first time anyone had acknowledged that my version of events mattered. The shift inside the company was subtle, but I noticed it. Legal stopped CCing me on vague warnings. HR postponed my review. Harry stopped making eye contact altogether. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, Karen requested a joint meeting. Me, Harry, Lydia, legal, the board liaison. The room was full when I arrived. Karen didn't waste time. "We've completed our preliminary findings," she said. "There are discrepancies between reported oversight and actual system activity." She turned on the screen. Logs appeared. Usernames. Timestamps. Access levels. She pointed to a column. "These are approval actions related to Atlas." She pointed to another. "These are compliance review actions." My name wasn't there. Harry's was. Repeatedly. The room went silent. Karen continued, calm and precise. "There is no evidence that my name accessed, modified, approved, or reviewed Atlas materials beyond requesting documentation. There is evidence that her access was restricted." She paused. "There is also evidence of unauthorized changes made under the assumption that compliance oversight had occurred." Lydia's face drained of color. Harry stared at the table. Ron said nothing. For the first time since this began, the narrative cracked. Not because I argued, but because the system told the truth. Karen closed her laptop. "We will issue a formal report," she said. "But I wanted to clarify this in person." Then she looked at me. "You were blamed for a project you never touched," she said plainly. "And the audit says otherwise." No one spoke. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Not a defense. Just silence. And in that silence, I realized something important. Being proven right doesn't feel like victory. It feels like standing alone in a room full of people who hoped you were wrong. The silence after Karen's statement didn't break on its own. It had to be forced. The board liaison cleared his throat and said, "We'll need the written report." Karen nodded. "You'll have it." That was it. No questions. No discussion. No acknowledgement of what had just been exposed. The meeting ended the way it began, politely, professionally, as if nothing irreversible had happened. People stood. Chairs slid back. Papers were gathered. No one looked at me. Harry left first. Lydia followed him without saying a word. Ron paused near the door like he wanted to say something, then thought better of it. I was the last one out. Back at my desk, an email was already waiting. Subject: temporary administrative hold. HR language: clean, bloodless. My duties were suspended, pending final audit conclusions. Not because I was suspected of wrongdoing. Not because I was cleared. Just pending. I sat there and stared at the screen, trying to understand how being proven uninvolved still translated into removal. That's when it hit me. Truth doesn't immediately replace a lie. It just destabilizes it. And instability makes people dangerous. By the next morning, the tone shifted again. Harry didn't come in. Lydia called in sick. Rumors moved faster than emails. People whispered about unauthorized approvals, about pressure from leadership, about things being hidden. No one said Harry's name out loud, but everyone thought it. At noon, legal requested another meeting with me. This time, it wasn't accusatory. It was cautious. "We may need a formal statement clarifying your lack of involvement," the attorney said. "For the report." "I've already provided documentation," I replied. "Yes," he said, "but now it needs to be on record." I gave the statement. Again, dates, access levels, requests denied, meetings not attended. He listened, took notes, didn't interrupt. When I finished, he said, "Thank you. This will be helpful." That word again. Helpful. Still no apology. That afternoon, Lydia called me. Her voice sounded strained, like she had practiced. "This has gone further than I expected," she said. "You expected me to take the fall," I replied. She didn't deny it. "I expected resolution," she said, quietly. "And if that meant my career?" She exhaled. "You're young. You would have recovered." That sentence settled between us, heavy and final. "Harry won't," she added. There it was, the truth underneath everything. They hadn't defended him because he was right. They defended him because he was necessary. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tell her how reckless it was, how exposed the company now was, how obvious the cover attempt looked. I just said, "The audit is going to say what it's going to say." She went quiet. By Friday, the preliminary report circulated among leadership. Not officially, not emailed, but people talked. Harry had bypassed compliance steps to meet deadlines. He had authorized vendor changes without approvals. He had assumed compliance would catch up. And when things started unraveling, he pointed in my direction. Not directly, indirectly, just enough to shift focus. The report didn't use the word blame. It used responsibility. Responsibility was now his. The board scheduled an emergency session. Harry was asked to attend. I wasn't. That night, my mother called. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She sounded tired. "They're saying Harry might be asked to step down," she said. "I know," I replied. "This is tearing the family apart." "It already did," I said. She didn't respond. The next week felt like slow motion. Harry returned to the office once, cleared his desk, avoided everyone, didn't look at me. HR lifted my administrative hold without explanation. No apology, no acknowledgement, just an email saying I could resume normal duties. Normal didn't exist anymore. People treated me differently now, but not better. Some were awkward. Some were overly polite. Some avoided me completely. A few whispered apologies when no one was listening. I always thought it was strange. One coworker said quietly, "You were never in those meetings." Another said, "I'm glad the truth came out." They all said it like it had nothing to do with them. The final audit report was issued on a Wednesday morning. It was thorough, neutral, devastating. It cleared me completely. It outlined systemic failures. It identified specific unauthorized actions. It recommended leadership changes. By Friday, Harry was officially no longer with the company. The announcement email was careful. It thanked him for his contributions. It cited strategic realignment. No mention of Atlas. No mention of blame. At home, the fallout was louder. Family group chats exploded. Accusations flew. Sides formed. People argued over whether the audit had gone too far, whether Karen had been too aggressive, whether I should have handled it internally. Handled it internally, as if I had orchestrated the investigation, as if I had pulled the logs myself. Ron called me again. "This didn't have to end like this," he said. "Yes," I replied. "It did." He sounded angry now. "You could have let it go." "Let what go?" I asked. "Being blamed." "You could have accepted responsibility for procedural oversight," he said. "It wouldn't have ruined you." "But it ruined Harry," I said. "He snapped because you didn't protect him." That sentence revealed everything. Not once did he say Harry was wrong. Not once did he say the company was compromised. Not once did he say I deserved fairness. Only that I had failed to protect someone who had thrown me in front of a moving train. "I didn't cause this," I said. "I didn't hide anything. I didn't lie." "That's not how families work," he said. "I guess not," I replied. After that call, I stopped answering. At work, leadership shifted. Interim managers stepped in. New compliance protocols were announced. Everyone suddenly cared about documentation. People asked for my input again. I gave it, professionally, calmly, without emotion. But something had changed in me. I no longer believed proximity to family meant safety. I no longer believed loyalty was mutual. And I no longer believed that being right guaranteed protection. One afternoon, Karen stopped by my office before leaving the building for the last time. "You handled this well," she said. "I didn't have much choice," I replied. She nodded. "You'd be surprised how many people choose silence." She hesitated, then added, "You should know, the attempt to shift responsibility was noted." "By who?" "By everyone who matters." After she left, I sat alone and thought about that. Being noted didn't feel like winning. It felt like being harried. The company moved on quickly. New projects, new priorities, new faces. Atlas became a cautionary tale no one referenced directly. Harry disappeared from internal conversations entirely. At family gatherings, his name became something people avoided. And I became something else. Not a villain, not a hero, a reminder of what happens when systems record more than intentions, of what happens when blame meets evidence, of what happens when someone refuses to quietly absorb consequences meant for someone else. The audit said otherwise, but the cost of that truth wasn't paid all at once. It was paid slowly, in glances, in distance, in relationships that never went back to what they were. And this was only the beginning. After the audit report went final, the company acted like it had survived a storm. People spoke in relief. Leadership sent emails about lessons learned and renewed commitment to integrity. New procedures were rolled out with polished slides and mandatory trainings. What no one said was that trust had cracked, not just in the systems, between people. I returned to my role officially, but the job no longer felt the same. My inbox was full again. My calendar had meetings again. My name was back on review, threads again. Yet every request carried an unspoken pause, like people were measuring their words around me. I had become the person who didn't fold. Some saw that as strength. Others saw it as a risk. Lydia resigned 2 months later. The announcement said she was pursuing personal priorities. The timing fooled no one. She didn't say goodbye to me. She didn't call. She didn't explain. At a family dinner I wasn't invited to, she reportedly told everyone that things had gotten complicated. Complicated was a generous word. Harry didn't resurface. Not publicly. Not professionally. His name faded from LinkedIn. His number stopped working. People speculated quietly, then moved on. That's what organizations do. They absorb damage and keep moving. Families do the same thing. Except they pretend they're not doing it. My mother tried to mend things. She invited people over. She urged me to reach out. She said holding on to this would only poison me. I told her I wasn't holding on to anything. I was just done explaining. At work, the shift became more obvious over time. People started asking me questions they used to take to Harry. They wanted my sign-off, my opinion, my review. The same people who had quietly assumed I was at fault now deferred to me like I had always been credible. That kind of turnaround doesn't feel good. It feels transactional. One afternoon, during a leadership meeting I had been invited to temporarily, someone joked, "At least we know compliance won't miss anything anymore." Everyone laughed. I didn't, because what they really meant was, "We know you won't take the blame," quietly. That reputation travels. A few weeks later, HR asked me to help redesign internal compliance workflows. On paper, it was an opportunity. In reality, it was damage control. I agreed, not because I wanted redemption, but because I wanted records. If anything went wrong again, I wanted the system to be airtight. I built processes that couldn't be bypassed without leaving fingerprints, dual approvals, automated logs, time-stamped checkpoints, clear accountability trails. Some managers complained it slowed them down. I reminded them that speed without oversight had already cost the company more than time. They didn't argue. Not after Atlas. At home, things stayed strained. Family gatherings became optional. When I did show up, conversations stayed shallow. No one mentioned the audit. No one mentioned Harry. No one apologized. Once, during a holiday dinner, an aunt said, "Well, at least everything worked out in the end." I asked her what she meant by worked out. She changed the subject. That's when I understood something important. They didn't see this as injustice corrected. They saw it as chaos contained, and I was the person who had refused to contain it quietly. That made me inconvenient. Months passed. The company stabilized. New leadership came in. The Atlas project was officially closed, written off as a loss. No one referenced it in meetings anymore. But then, something unexpected happened. A former vendor contacted me directly. She said she had been part of Atlas. She said she had raised concerns about last-minute changes and approval confusion. She said she was ignored. "I saw your name mentioned in emails," she said. "Not as someone approving anything, as someone who was supposed to." That line stuck with me. I asked her to forward what she had. What she sent filled in gaps I hadn't even known existed. Emails where Harry implied compliance had signed off verbally. Messages where he assured vendors that documentation would follow. Threads where my name was used as a shield. Not forged. Not faked. Just invoked. I forwarded everything to legal. Not because the audit wasn't enough, but because I was done letting people rewrite what had happened. Legal responded quickly this time. "Thank you. We'll add this to our records." Records. That word again. The thing no one feared until it caught up with them. That night, I received a message from Lydia. The first one in months. "I hear you're still digging," she wrote. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "I'm not digging," I wrote. "I'm documenting." There was a long pause. Then she responded, "You've made your point." That response told me everything. To her, truth had a limit. Once her position, her son, and her reputation were already damaged. Further clarity felt like punishment. To me, clarity felt like safety. I didn't reply. At work, I was asked to present the new compliance framework to the board. Standing in that room again, I saw different faces, but the same dynamic. People who valued protection over transparency. People who preferred narratives to logs. I presented anyway. Clean. Clear. Unemotional. When I finished, the board chair said, "This should prevent another Atlas." I said, "It will record it if there is one." That wasn't what he wanted to hear, but he nodded. After the meeting, someone pulled me aside. "Do you ever regret not just taking the hit?" he asked quietly. "It would have been easier." I thought about it, about the weeks of silence, the family pressure, the way my name had been passed around like a solution to someone else's problem. "No," I said, "because it wouldn't have stopped there." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "If I'd accepted blame for something I didn't do," I said, "that would have become my role. The person who absorbs mistakes. The person who makes things go away." He didn't respond, because he understood. Over time, I noticed something else. People stopped trying to pull me into gray areas. They stopped asking me to just sign off. They stopped implying that procedure was flexible, not because they respected the rules, but because they knew I wouldn't bend. That kind of clarity isolates you. It also protects you. At home, my mother eventually asked the question everyone had avoided. "Do you forgive them?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "I don't think that's the right question." "What is?" "Whether I trust them again." She didn't push, because she already knew the answer. The audit had ended. The report had cleared me, but the consequences were still unfolding. Because being proven right doesn't undo the moment when everyone was willing to let you be wrong. And once you've seen that moment clearly, you don't forget it. Time didn't heal anything. It just gave everyone room to pretend they were healed. At work, the new compliance systems became routine. People stopped complaining about extra steps and started acting like they had always wanted them. The company polished its image. Internal newsletters talked about strong governance culture, like it had always been there. I watched all of it from the inside, fully aware of how fragile that culture actually was. The strange part was that I was no longer invisible. Executives who used to walk past my desk without noticing me now greeted me by name. New hires were told to check with her first. When problems surfaced, they were brought to me early, not late. It wasn't power. It was positioning. I had become proof that the system could bite back, and that made people careful. Then, one morning, I was called into a meeting I hadn't expected. The board wanted to review the Atlas fallout one last time, not to revisit blame, to understand exposure. I sat across from people who had once quietly accepted a version of events that painted me as careless. Now they wanted precision, timelines, decision points. I gave them exactly that. I didn't editorialize. I didn't remind them how close they had come to letting the wrong person absorb the consequences. I let the facts do what they always do when they're finally allowed to exist. Afterward, the board chair asked, "Why didn't you escalate sooner?" I answered honestly, "I did, in writing, repeatedly." He nodded, and when that didn't work, I documented it. That answer landed heavier than any accusation. After the meeting, HR followed up. They wanted to update my file, remove any reference to Atlas entirely. Clean slate. I declined. "I want the record to reflect what happened," I said. Accurately. They looked uncomfortable. "Why?" the HR director asked. "Because erasing it helps the wrong people," I replied. She didn't argue. At home, things took a turn I hadn't expected. Harry reached out. Not directly. Through my mother. He wanted to talk. I said no. Not because I was angry. Because I knew what that conversation would be. An explanation. A justification. An attempt to reframe. I didn't need closure from him. I already had clarity. A week later, he emailed me anyway. It was long. Defensive. Apologetic in the abstract. Specific in all the wrong ways. He talked about pressure, expectations, deadlines, how he never thought it would land on me. That sentence stuck out. Land on me. As if blame was gravity. As if it simply fell. I replied with one sentence. "You let it land." He didn't respond. Family tension spiked again after that. Some relatives said I was being harsh, that he had learned his lesson, that forgiveness mattered more than correctness. I asked one simple question. Did anyone stop it when they thought I was the problem? No one answered. That silence was familiar by now. At work, another issue surfaced. Not Atlas. Something smaller, but similar. A project lead tried to rush approvals. Documentation lagged. Someone suggested, casually, that compliance could retroactively validate decisions. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to me. I said no. The project paused. No drama. No escalation. Just a clear boundary. Later, the project lead pulled me aside. "You know this slows everything down," he said. I looked at him. "So does an audit." He nodded and walked away. That's when I realized something else had changed. People no longer tested how much I would absorb. They tested how firm the system was. That distinction mattered. At home, my mother tried again. "Lydia misses you," she said. "She hasn't said that to me," I replied. "She feels it," my mother insisted. "Feeling something and acknowledging it aren't the same," I said. My mother looked tired. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Now," I said. "Now I live with the information I have." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't confuse proximity with loyalty," I said, "or silence with support." That answer ended the conversation. Months passed. The company announced a new ethics initiative, training sessions, reporting channels, Anonymous escalation options. People joked about it quietly. I didn't, because I knew why it existed. Not because the company had suddenly grown a conscience, but because one situation had come close to exposing how quickly convenience can override integrity, and how dangerous that is when family and power intersect. One afternoon, I received a call from a junior analyst. She sounded nervous. "I think something's off with the project," she said, "but I'm scared to say anything." I listened, asked questions, reviewed what she had. She was right. I escalated it properly. It was addressed early, quietly, without damage. Afterward, she thanked me. "I didn't think anyone would take it seriously," she said. I told her, document first. Speak second. Never reverse that order. That became my rule. Not just at work. Everywhere. I stopped explaining myself to family members who had already decided what the story was. I stopped defending my silence. I stopped chasing resolution that only existed if everyone agreed. Because the truth had already done its job. It had shown me who was willing to trade fairness for comfort, and who wasn't. The audit said otherwise, but the real audit happened after. In conversations, in reactions, in who stood still and who stepped back when the facts came out. That's how you learn who people really are. Not when things go wrong, but when blame needs a place to settle. By the time a full year had passed since Atlas, the story had been simplified into something manageable. Inside the company, it was remembered as a process failure. Inside the family, it was remembered as a misunderstanding that went too far. Both versions were convenient. Neither was true. I noticed how often people spoke about it in passive language. Mistakes were made. Communication broke down. Lines blurred. No one ever said choices were made. That omission told me everything. At work, my role had quietly expanded. Not officially, not with a title change, but in practice. I was pulled into early discussions, asked to review project structures before they were approved. I was invited into rooms where decisions were framed as already made, and I learned to slow those rooms down. Some people resented it. Others were relieved. One senior manager said it out loud during a meeting. "We don't want another Atlas." He said it like a warning. I heard it like a confession. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who once let my name take the weight of that project now used it as shorthand for caution. That kind of recognition is complicated. It doesn't come with gratitude. It comes with expectation. Then something happened that tested everything I thought I had learned. The company announced an internal review of legacy projects. Not an audit, a review. The language was careful, but the intent was obvious. They wanted to know what else had been quietly managed the way Atlas had been. I was asked to lead part of it. I hesitated before accepting. Not because I couldn't do it, because I knew what it would uncover. And I knew who would be uncomfortable. The review started calmly. We focused on documentation, access controls, approval trails. Patterns emerged quickly. Certain managers bypassed steps consistently. Certain teams relied on assumptions instead of confirmations. Certain names appeared often where they shouldn't have. None of them were mine. That didn't stop the tension from building. One afternoon, a department head cornered me after a meeting. "You're digging too deep," he said. "I'm following the scope," I replied. "You're reopening old wounds." "I'm documenting systems," I said. "Wounds are personal." He didn't like that answer. "You're making people nervous," he added. "Then something needs attention," I said. The review report was submitted in phases. Each phase led to small adjustments, quiet corrections, subtle role changes. No public fallout, but behind closed doors, pressure grew. I started getting suggestions, not instructions. Suggestions. Maybe we don't need to document this part. This could be handled informally. Let's not put names to this. Every time I said the same thing. If it's informal, it doesn't belong in a review. That answer didn't make me popular. At home, my family noticed the distance hardening. I stopped attending certain gatherings entirely, not out of spite, out of clarity. When I did show up, conversations stayed on safe topics: weather, work in vague terms, plans that never included specifics. Harry's name still wasn't spoken. One evening, my mother tried again. "You know he's struggling," she said. "I know," I replied. "He lost everything." "He lost a role," I said. "Not everything." She frowned. "You don't think that was enough?" "I think consequences matching actions is rare," I said. "This wasn't excessive. It was delayed." That ended that conversation. The family wanted me to soften the story. I refused. At work, the review wrapped up without drama. Leadership thanked me for my thoroughness. The phrase sounded neutral, but I could hear the edge. I had proven something they couldn't unsee: that systems didn't fail randomly. People bent them. And when pressure hit, those bends became breaks. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at an internal ethics panel. Voluntary, informal. I declined, not because I had nothing to say, because I didn't want to become the moral example. I had never wanted to be the lesson. I just didn't want to be the scapegoat. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office, I ran into Ron in the parking lot. The first time I'd seen him in months. He looked older, more tired. "We need to clear the air," he said. "Do we?" I asked. He hesitated. "The family feels fractured." "The family fractured when truth became inconvenient," I replied. He sighed. "You've always been rigid." "I've always been consistent," I said. He shook his head. "There's a difference." "Only when it's uncomfortable," I replied. He didn't argue. Instead, he said, "You could have handled this with more grace." That word again. Grace. The word people use when they want you to absorb harm quietly. "I handled it with accuracy," I said. "That's not the same thing." He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "You've changed." "Yes," I replied. "I had to." He didn't respond. He got into his car and drove away. I stood there for a moment, thinking about that. About how people notice change when it stops serving them. At work, the atmosphere settled again. New normal. New routines. Fewer shortcuts. People stopped testing boundaries because they knew the answer. And I stopped expecting acknowledgement because I had learned something important. Being right doesn't restore what was broken. It just clarifies what was never stable to begin with. The audit had done its job, but the real exposure wasn't in the logs. It was in the choices people made when they thought no one was watching. And I had been watching the whole time. By the second year after Atlas, the company looked stable from the outside. Revenue recovered. New clients came in. Leadership spoke confidently again. If you were new, you would never guess how close everything had come to cracking. That's how organizations survive. They don't fix their memory. They replace it. Inside, though, the atmosphere had changed in ways you could feel, but not measure. Decisions took longer. Emails were more careful. People asked for confirmation instead of assuming it existed. That didn't make things warmer. It made them quieter. I had settled into that quiet. I did my work, went home, kept my life small and contained. I didn't volunteer for family events I didn't want to attend. I didn't correct stories that weren't mine to fix. Then a situation came up that forced everything back to the surface. A former employee filed a complaint, not against the company as a whole, against specific leadership decisions made during the Atlas period. It wasn't about money. It was about retaliation. And my name appeared in the document, not as the accused, as a reference. Legal contacted me immediately. They wanted to know if I would be willing to speak to external counsel. I said yes, not because I wanted to reopen the past, because I understood what silence does. The interview was long, detailed, exhausting. They asked about the climate during the audit, about pressure, about suggestions to handle things quietly, about whether I had felt isolated or targeted. I answered honestly. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't soften it either. When the interview ended, the attorney said, "Your testimony is consistent." I understood what he meant. Consistency is hard to argue with. News of the complaint spread internally, even though it wasn't supposed to. People grew nervous again. Meetings became tense. Decisions were delayed. Emails were rewritten multiple times before being sent. Leadership didn't reach out to me directly this time. They had learned. At home, the reaction was immediate. My mother called, worried. "Is this going to start everything again?" "I didn't start it the first time," I replied. Ron called too. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "I didn't file the complaint," I said. "But you're involved," he insisted. "I was involved before," I said. "That didn't stop anyone." He was quiet. "You're making it worse," he said finally. "No," I replied. "I'm refusing to make it disappear." That line ended the call. The complaint triggered another review. Smaller than an audit, narrower in scope, but still uncomfortable. Emails were pulled, meeting notes reviewed, decisions traced. Again the pattern emerged. Pressure flowed downward. Responsibility flowed sideways. And when consequences approached, names were offered instead of facts. I watched leadership scramble to contain it, not because they were guilty of the complaint, but because they recognized the behavior. They had seen it before. They had participated in it. This time, though, they were more careful. I was not sidelined. I was not isolated. No one asked me to absorb anything. That alone told me how much Atlas had changed them. The complaint eventually settled quietly. No admission of wrongdoing. No dramatic fallout. But internally it shifted something. People stopped treating ethical boundaries as flexible, not because they had become principled, but because they had learned that documentation outlives loyalty. At home, the distance became permanent. Family gatherings continued without me. Decisions were made without consulting me. I was still mentioned, but not included. Strangely, that hurt less than the early weeks of silence, because now it was honest. One evening, my mother asked if I felt lonely. I told her the truth. "I feel clear," I said. She didn't understand that answer, but I did. Clarity is what comes after confusion ends. I no longer wondered who would stand with me if things went wrong. I had already seen that. I no longer questioned whether truth would be enough. I had watched it work slowly, painfully, but decisively. At work, a junior manager asked me for advice. "People say you're difficult," he said carefully, "but they also say you're fair." I smiled at that. "Being fair often looks difficult to people who rely on shortcuts," I said. He nodded. "I'd rather be fair," he said. "Then document everything," I replied. That became my quiet mantra, not because I distrusted everyone, but because I had learned what happens when trust is assumed instead of verified. One afternoon, as I reviewed a routine file, I realized something else. I no longer felt defensive. I no longer felt the need to prove what I had survived. The audit had cleared my name long ago. What remained was my choice, whether to carry bitterness or to carry precision. I chose precision because precision doesn't ask for understanding. It just asks for accuracy. And accuracy had saved me when nothing else would. The story people tell about Atlas will keep changing. It will soften. It will fade. It will lose names and details. But the record won't, and neither will the lesson. By the time the dust finally settled, I had stopped waiting for things to feel normal again. Normal assumes return. What had happened didn't allow for that. At work, I was steady, respected in a cautious way, trusted but not embraced. I was consulted when accuracy mattered and avoided when speed was the priority. That balance worked for me. I had learned not to chase inclusion. Inclusion without integrity is just proximity. The company moved forward with its new identity. Ethics statements, updated values, quiet pride in having handled difficult situations. Atlas was no longer mentioned by name. It became a reference point without specifics, a warning people alluded to without details. I understood why. Details make people accountable. Then something unexpected happened. A new executive joined the company. She came from outside the industry with no ties to the past, no history with our internal politics. During her first month, she scheduled one-on-ones with department leads and senior staff. When she met with me, she didn't ask about Atlas. She asked about systems. What breaks first when pressure hits? She asked. I told her. What gets bypassed? She asked. I told her. What do people assume will be forgiven? She asked. I paused before answering. The idea that responsibility can be reassigned after the fact, I said. She nodded slowly. That tracks. Later, I heard she had asked similar questions across the company, not to confirm a story, to understand patterns. That felt different. At home, things stayed distant but calmer. The anger had burned out. What remained was something quieter. Resignation, maybe, or acceptance. I stopped being the topic of discussion. I became the person people referenced indirectly. She's busy. She's working late. She has her reasons. They weren't wrong. I was busy, working, building, living without waiting for approval. Then, one evening, my mother told me Harry had moved back into town. He's trying to start over, she said. I nodded. I hope it works. You don't want to see him? She asked. No, I replied. I don't need to. She looked at me like she wanted to argue. Then she didn't, because she knew I wasn't speaking from anger. I was speaking from closure. At work, the new executive announced a review of leadership development pathways, mentorship, accountability, transparency. She asked me to help design part of it. I accepted, not because I wanted to shape people, but because I wanted systems that didn't depend on personalities. During one planning session, someone asked, "What happens when a high performer breaks protocol?" I answered without hesitation. The system records it, I said. Performance doesn't erase behavior. The room went quiet. Then the executive nodded. Good, she said. That's what we'll build around. That moment mattered more than I expected, not because it validated me, because it showed that the company was finally willing to prioritize structure over convenience. Something Atlas had exposed too late. At home, my mother asked one last question. Do you ever wish you'd handled it differently? She said. I thought about that, about the pressure to stay quiet, the temptation to take the hit, the promise that it would all blow over. No, I said. I wish fewer people had needed proof to believe me. She nodded slowly. That's fair, she said. It was the closest thing to acknowledgement I had received. As the years passed, Atlas faded further into the background. New hires didn't know the story. New managers didn't feel the tension. But the systems remembered. Every approval left a trail. Every change required confirmation. Every assumption had to be backed by record. That was the real legacy, not the damage, the correction. One afternoon, as I packed up to leave work, I overheard a conversation. Someone said, "We can't do that. Compliance will flag it." Another replied, "Good. Better now than later." I smiled to myself, not because I wanted to be feared, but because prevention is quieter than recovery. At home that night, I thought about how this story would sound if someone else told it. They might frame it as betrayal, or injustice, or resilience. I don't see it that way. I see it as clarity arriving late, but decisively. They blamed me for a project I never touched. The audit said otherwise. But the real shift didn't happen when the report was issued. It happened when people stopped assuming silence meant agreement, and stopped believing that blame could be redirected without consequence. That's not a dramatic ending. It's a structural one, and structures are what actually last. I don't tell this often, not because it's painful, but because it's inconvenient. It doesn't end with revenge. It doesn't end with applause. It doesn't end with anyone standing up in a room and admitting they were wrong. It ends the way most real situations do, quietly, unevenly, with consequences that never quite land where you expect them to. Years later, people still ask me how I stayed calm through all of it. The truth is, I wasn't calm. I was focused. Focused on records. Focused on timelines. Focused on making sure the truth didn't depend on anyone's memory or goodwill. Because goodwill is the first thing people sacrifice when pressure hits. If I had trusted apologies, I would have been buried by them. If I had trusted family loyalty, I would have been absorbed. If I had trusted silence to protect me, I would have disappeared. Instead, I trusted systems. And systems, unlike people, don't care who they disappoint. The company is still standing. Stronger in some ways. More cautious in others. People like to say it learned its lesson. I don't know if organizations learn. I think they adapt when survival demands it. As for my family, we exist in a new configuration now. Not broken, just redefined. We show up when necessary. We're polite. We avoid certain subjects. There are no dramatic confrontations left to have. Everyone knows what happened. They just don't all agree on what it means. Harry never apologized directly. Lydia never acknowledged the role she played. Ron still believes things could have been handled better. I've stopped waiting for any of that to change. Because accountability doesn't always come with confession. Sometimes it comes with distance. Sometimes it comes with reputation. Sometimes it comes with people realizing too late that you weren't as expendable as they thought. What I learned from all of this isn't something you find in training manuals. It's simpler than that. Blame doesn't look like anger. It looks like suggestion. It looks like implication. It looks like everyone slowly turning in the same direction and hoping you won't notice. Until you do. And once you notice, you have a choice. You can accept the role they're offering you. Or you can insist on accuracy, even when it makes everyone uncomfortable. I chose accuracy. Not because I'm brave, because I understood the alternative. I understood that once you accept blame for something you didn't do, you become the place blame goes next time. And the time after that, and the time after that. The audit said otherwise. But more importantly, the record said otherwise. The timestamps, the access logs, the approvals that never existed. Those things spoke when people wouldn't. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt that slow shift when responsibility starts drifting toward you without explanation, pay attention. If people start speaking around facts instead of showing them, pay attention. If someone tells you to just take one for the team, ask yourself who benefits from that. Because teams don't ask one person to disappear so everyone else can stay comfortable. Systems do, and systems can be changed. But only if someone refuses to quietly absorb what was never theirs to carry. That was my choice. I didn't walk away triumphant. I walked away clear. Clear about who I am. Clear about what I won't accept. Clear about the difference between loyalty and convenience. And that clarity has followed me into every room since. So now I want to ask you something. If you were in my place, would you have taken the blame just to keep the peace? Would you have stayed quiet to protect people who didn't protect you? Or would you have let the truth stand, even if it cost you relationships that were already conditional? Because sometimes the audit doesn't just review a project. It reviews the people in your life, and it tells you exactly where you stand. What do you think? Would you have done the same?